right. No, thank you for introducing me. That's good. Before I get into the talk, I just want to outline the title of my talk, Bundarra Pluton, Exploring for Copper and Coal Country. Basically, we are in the Bowen Basin there, which is more or less coal country. And when I tell people I'm exploring for copper out here, they either get very interested or get very confused and think I hopped on the wrong bus to come out to site. So, yeah, but in this talk, I hope to show you that we do have some interesting stuff out here. The general disclaimer is just over there. Read it to your heart's content. But as Duke, we have a few tenements around the country. Red Hill down in New South Wales, but due to border closure and stuff, that has not been a priority in the past couple of years. I've got some pretty interesting stuff in Queensland, specifically Prairie Creek, epithermal gold that we've done some work on in the past year, but this talk will just center on the Bundarra Pluton up there just inland from Mackay. I wanted to outline the key points for this talk that you can just keep in touch with and keep in mind as I walk through everything, and then we'll just circle back to it at the end. And these are pretty much just what is the Bundarra Pluton, and then with that, how do we effectively and efficiently explore the Pluton, which is a 50-kilometer strike extent, without running out of time or money, which is a general struggle for a lot of exploration companies, I guess. Right, the Bundarra project. We are located in northern Bowen Basin, as I said before, which is the lower Permian, upper Triassic rift-related sedimentary basin. We're located in between Nebo and Moranbah, just on the beef road there. In terms of logistics, it is which is pretty much a dream. We're an hour away from a couple airports, half an hour away from a couple mine camps, and we even have a D11 dozer just sitting at the bottom of one of our hills. So it's, yeah, pretty good in that regard. What is it that we're exploring? It is a Cretaceous intrusive cross-cutting Permian sediments. That is the crux of it. There are three main Cretaceous intrusion periods recognized in the Bowen Basin. We're sitting in the 135 to 125 million year old suite. How do we know this? There was fission track dating done within zircons on the Bundarra Pluton, which put it at an age of around 126 million years old. So it's always good when it works out with the regional geology age ranges there. In terms of the regional mineralisation and what's known in the larger area, I come back to a study that was done by Horton actually in 1978 when he looked at the Queensland known mineralised areas, and he outlined a few mineralised belts. Now the Bundarra Pluton is sitting within the Marion Creek Trend, which he outlined there, and the Pioneer Lineament. Whether or not these are actually true or not, I mean, who knows? We can debate those, but I've shown this because it was a large driving factor behind Duke picking up some other tenements around the area over Duania and Waitara, which Waitara is a porphyry deposit just northwest of Bundarra, and Duania is a interpreted buried intrusive, and the fact that it is within this trend is very curious. But hey, there's mineralization there. That's always good cause to pick it up. If we zoom into the Bundarra Pluton, it cross-cuts several sedimentary units in the Back Creek group, which is the lighter blue color there surrounding the intrusive, the red center, the blob. You will see a gray unit around the Bundarra Pluton there, which is a prominent hornfels halo, and it extends 500 to 800 meters around from the granodiorite into the sediments. So when the Bundarra Pluton intruded into the sediments, it just hornfels it up to albite epidote facies, and within time and erosion, the Pluton itself and the surrounding sediment all eroded away, as geology does, and created a prominent ridge line from the harder hornfels argillite, and has a vertical extent of 250 meters. Fairly impressive actually when you get on site and you just see this mountain ridge extending around in a circular fashion. It almost resembles a meteorite impact. But it is a multi-stage intrusive with 4 main bodies have been identified. You can see one big circle. There's a couple there out to the east, and then a very prominent one in the southwest. It is quite a large system. It's got a 50-kilometer strike extent around the edge of the intrusive, which is both a blessing and a curse as an exploration manager, because it's a large area to explore, but it's a large area to explore. So if you get my drift there. There are several north-northwest striking dikes and structures going through there. You can see with the purple and the black, and there is also some fairly important northeast controlling structures that you can see controlling many units on a local scale down at a prospect level. Now, I just wanted to also show the same scale without the geology, just so you can get an idea of the Pluton and what I was saying before. It's quite a stark feature of the Pluton and the surrounding sediments. At the right time of year, you can actually map the contact using the vegetation, just because nothing will grow within the Pluton. And you can also see all of those friendly coal mines that are surrounding us out to the west and northwest. But we have numerous high priority targets. I've outlined a few of them on there: Mt Flora, Isons, Rogers, Corn, and Absalon. I will be referring to these throughout the talk, so you can just get an idea of their spatial relationship there. Now, we also have 47 copper, silver, and gold prospects around the place. Now, these are the only ones that are logged within the mine database online, but there are many, many more when you... Moving on to the next slide there. It's just an aerial photo of the same scale, and I just wanted to really show this to show the strong contrast between the Pluton and the surrounding sediments. In the right time of year, you can actually map the Pluton and whatnot using the vegetation, which is fairly handy when you're trying to go over there and it's just float around. You can also see there's several adjacent coal mines that are about 5 kilometers west of the Pluton. We've got Morval and Copperbella. There is numerous high priority targets. There we go. Numerous high priority targets. Mt Flora, Isons, Rogers, Corn, and Absalon. I'll be referring to these throughout the talk, so you can just get an idea of some of their spatial relationships there. There's 47 copper, silver, and gold prospects logged on the mine's website there, but there are many, many more once you actually start walking around the hills. And so it's a fairly cool project to just get an appreciation for what was done in the past. And it was historically worked since the 1800s, that you can see some of these photos in here. We have an old smelter that's smack bam in the middle of the Pluton, which you can just appreciate the scale up there on the top. And then some just historic photos from the 1800s, I believe these photos were taken. It was operational from 1879 through to 1909 with a peak output of a whole 297 tons a year and employing a whole 12 people. So a little bit of history there. And what were they going after? So pretty much these, the shaft, as I said, were all throughout the hills. We've got a keen geologist looking at one of them, but thankfully he didn't go in because there is a few structural issues you can see in some of the other photos. All right, moving on. Mt Flora. I'm going to start the prospect kind of talk on Mt Flora because it is the cornerstone of the Bundarra Pluton, where we started exploration and our mineral resource, and then also where we trialed a lot of our exploration techniques to look elsewhere around the Pluton. So the area had 3 independent companies previously exploring Mt Flora, a little bit of drilling here and there and mapping historic shafts where there were some brave geologists back in the day. They also calculated a small resource estimate. So logically, it was the best place to start. And then Duke came along 2019, we did a diamond drilling program and one identified mineralisation, but predominantly to collect geological information. And using this, we pretty much planned a resource drill out, phase 1 and 2. Phase 1 was partly exploration, partly resource drill out. because it also identified several new areas and discoveries, one being the quarry lode and one being the Mt Flora northern extension. And so we released the maiden inferred resource estimate last year on Mt Flora and the quarry lodes, and I'll go through the rest of it in the coming slides. So this is what it looks like in terms of our drilling. We have 109 holes. The resource estimate was 16 million tonnes at 0.5 copper using 0.2 cutoff for 78,000 tonnes of copper and 3.5 million ounces of silver. Now, that resource estimate was done on part of the drilling because we continued to drill after that just due to some time constraints. But you can also appreciate there's Mt Flora there on the western side and then the quarry lode on the eastern side. And then for reference and scale, you can see the 4 additional holes that were done for the Mt Flora extension 300 meters to the north. And the size of this area is about 900 meters across and 950 meters along strike and 300 meters down. So it's a fairly sizable area and a really good start to the Pluton in our eyes. The big thing about Mt Flora, the mineralization is predictable and consistent. It pretty much strikes north and south and it dips to the east, which you can see in this cross section over here. So this is essentially one of our better intersections or cross sections with some decent grade in there, just to show you an example of what's going on. You can see in the surrounding photos that there is chalcopyrite dominated sulfide veins at the center of larger alteration halos, which consist of sericite with little string of sulfide veins in there. It's roughly dipping about 40 to 50 degrees to the east, and with some pretty decent intersections. You can trace them down from hole to hole to hole, being 14 meters at 0.8, 16 meters at 1.17. And the quarry as well had some pretty decent hits. As I said, was a new discovery with 8 meters at 2.99% copper. But yeah, you can just appreciate the mineralization of structurally controlled lodes with large alteration halo, which is a pretty important factor. With that in mind, we're drilling mineralization, but the big crux of it is where to find more of it. So as I said, Mt Flora was a bit of a training ground. On the left there is the VTM, which is just identifying the conductive areas, because what we tried to do was not only identify the mineralization, but try and use the technique to find it efficiently and effectively. And so the VTM data identify conductive zones associated with mineralization, and then thus forth, hopefully it should work out. One of the first things I did when I got on the ground was the PXRF survey. That was back in 2020, just before COVID came along. And it was a very, very simple, rapidly and effective survey that just used PXRF Vanta M series to identify mineralization on a 80 by 80 meter grid. And then you can see Mt Flora is identified there and the quarry anomaly out to the east. And then we have our 2 northern trends that were kind of the cornerstone of the drilling to identify the northern extent of Mt Flora. With the geophysical survey in mind, we trialed a few different surveys, including the 3D IP, fixed loop EM, but on the left there is the 3D IP with a clip going through the section there. And basically pink is good, orange less good, and then barren is bad. But the best mineralization is associated with that pink area there. And so, as I said, the north-south striking lodes dipping to the east were clearly identified using the survey. And this is also replicated in the fixed loop EM on the east side there. That's got the context of the previous drill holes. And you can identify 520 meters along strike of the mineralization of the best mineralization that is as well. And then we have some additional anomalies out to the north. Now, the big crux of the Bundarra Pluton and identifying and putting these anomalies into context is the conductivity response. So the granodiorite is non-conductive, and then the sediments out from the granodiorite are extremely conductive with the graphite, but then there's this little halo in between them, which is essentially non-conductive as well. And thus, when we try and identify conductive anomalies, it's generally associated with sulfide veins. And you can clearly see in the fixed loop EM there, we've got a great trend. And then if I step back one to the soils, just for correlation, you can see the northern extent there also correlates with some great fixed loop EM conductivity data as well. We also trialed gradient array IP, which also works. So basically we had a full sweep of what we want to use, but the crux was also time and money. And so we went forward with gradient array IP to survey other areas, including Corn and Absalon. But then we soon found that whenever we used a gradient array IP block, we then extended it and extended it. And to do that across the whole Pluton was going to take upwards of a year. So we ended up finding a company in America that was recommended to us to reprocess some historic data from 2011 that was collected by Regency Resources. And so you can see over here, this is the delivered product of the reprocessed data. They essentially took the survey, reprocessed it, inverted it, and delivered a 3D block model of conductivity and chargeability to a depth of 300 meters below the surface, covering most of the project. There's a few gaps in there, which were rather annoying, but that was just because of tenement boundaries back in the day. What are you going to do when you get free data from a historic company, I guess? The best thing about this, it replicated the previous gradient array IP surveys, so it gave us great confidence with using the data and moving forward with it. And then we could also get successive depth slices of, for example, 100 meters, 170, and 240. And so you can see at Mt Flora, I'm not sure if my mouse works here, but this conductivity response coming out here associated with the mineralisation, and then you can pick a few other areas, and then you can get a bit lost in this zone over here out to the southwest. Now, to combat this, we also used soils data. And so this was an excellent resource, as I said before, on Mt Flora. It perfectly identified Mt Flora and the quarry lode and led to a discovery of the Mt Flora extension to the north. And so we thought, all right, let's cover the entire Pluton. And so over a few months, we took 22,000 soil samples to date and just analyzed it using the PXRF Vanta M series, and resulted in total coverage of the Pluton, and also went into the surrounding areas of a more regional extension of 720 meter spaced lines and 80 meter spaced samples, which also found some stuff of interest, which will be done in a future announcement. The crux of the soil sampling, it identified 10 main areas of interest, which was purely just pulled out based on their scale. As you can see in the southwest, there was still a lot of other areas of interest, but it was getting the geological context for the soil anomaly and then trying to extrapolate it from there. And so, as I said before, trying to deduce the geophysical surveys is a little bit hard, but when you put it in context with the soil samples, you can do something like this with grid data. And so when you take a successive grid slice through the VTM data, and then you also grid the soils data, you can see profile peaks. And so at the top here, the green and the red lines reflect the soils and the VTM conductivity. And so you can see an offset between the two of the soils outcropping at the surface, the lodes outcropping the surface, resulting in a soil anomaly. And then at depth with fresh sulfides, they create a VTM conductivity anomaly. And so not only can you identify mineralization with this, using this technique, we could also identify the dip and the strike. And so over a period of a week or so, I can't take credit for this myself, but I got one of my geologists who probably hated me by the end of it to step through the data on a successive spacing of 30 meters, and then just click all of the peaks from everything that he could see and identify the strike extent of all the different anomalies. The different colors are very important. You can see red, blue, and yellow lines in there. The red lines reflect the conductive trends associated with soil anomalies, and so and the blue ones just reflect pretty much geophysical anomalism. And so between the two, I think we identified 39 kilometers of linear conductive trends. But then when you looked at both of them together and correlated PXRF and geophysical trends, we picked up 19 kilometers, which was a very, very good start to the future RC planning. And then to avoid any favoritism, I guess, of the areas of interest, I also looked at prospectivity modeling, and we worked very closely with Kinex and to produce this weights of evidence prospectivity modeling, which pretty much got all of the data from the geophysics, the soils, historic drilling, historic soils, any mapping that we could attribute into there as well. And then we circled prospective areas and then ranked them accordingly, and then spat out a ranking system over here. And you can see the first order targets, there were just 10 of them circled there, and then countless other second order targets you can see. Now, using this information, we then stepped into, I guess, mapping mode after that, because you can't necessarily just plan a program looking at a computer screen. And so over 2 to 3 weeks, myself and another geologist who took over from me looked at several areas of interest just to confirm the data that we are seeing, and map the strike and collect additional data to use for future targeting. Over on the top left is the Absalon prospect. So that is a 3 to 4 meter mineralized lode outcropping in granodiorite, which was very impressive to see in map. Painted peaks out to the right, which is adequately named for the painted peaks of green copper coming down the side of it. And there was actually some other really cool extensional jogs that came through around the Rogers area that you can see some examples in the bottom left over there as well. And the big question, does it work? I think that a lot of people want to know. So using this technique to identify the strike extent through the profile peak targeting, we planned 5 drill holes at Corn, Isons, and Rogers. Corn was a bit of a different story we'll go through shortly, but Isons and Rogers were pretty much the big test. And so Isons, we returned 6 meters at 1.4% copper from 102 meters. And that, from our estimation, didn't hit the main target at depth due to drilling issues, which also makes me think that there's definitely something there as well, because when drilling gets a little bit tough or whatnot, something's got to be there. Rogers was a huge success story because it has no previous drilling or anything like that. And then both holes, we drilled along strike from each other, and BNDD 3 and 4, you can see in the middle there, and we intersected multiple mineralized lodes. And due to the strike and dip orientations, they are different lodes as well. So the crux of it is either our targeting method works or there's copper mineralization everywhere, and either or, it's a pretty good outcome in my eyes. And I said before, there is the Corn area of interest, which is the breccia. It's something a little bit different to the previous mineralization I was showing you before, which is just that classic structurally controlled mineralization with chalcopyrite pyrite. The breccia is just a breccia pipe, which is about 50 by 150 by 75 meters mapped at the surface, and then extending a little bit more once we're doing a little bit of drilling. Some previous RC holes were done by Duke. You can see over there, hole 1 and 2, and then 3 and 5 on the ridge, which returned some pretty decent results. And then we decided to also stick a diamond hole in there because it was very challenging to try and deduce a breccia from RC chips. And the results you can see over here, well, one, this is just an outcrop in the top right, and then we just released some of our results that we finally got back from the lab last week. So 22 meters at 0.35, 22.35 meters at 0.7% copper, sorry, that would be much better. But yeah, and 15 meters at 1.07. So basically, it was a breccia pipe that we can see that we assume to be vertical, but hydrothermal infill, and it has got some very large clasts that you can see outcropping at the surface that are about a meter scale of displacement. So it had to be pretty high energy, but then on a small scale within the drill space, and you can see the kind of jigsaw breccia as well, that you can fit the pieces back together. So it's fairly interesting, and we're quite excited to do some additional drilling through there. All right, using all of this, I guess what are we going to test in the future? We have a pretty extensive 11,000 meter RC program coming through. We're going to be testing 9 primary targets in the southwestern area. These targets have been generated using about the exploration technique that I have spoken about previously, and through geophysics, geochemistry, and ground truthing. 4 of the drill targets have never been tested by previous companies, so it's going to be a little bit of an interesting drill out in that regard as well. A PXRF Vanta series is going to be used on the rig to rapidly assess the prospectivity of any given drill target, so we don't necessarily have to wait for assays before making decisions, which is a huge benefit to us out there. And all holes will also be downhole surveyed to collect additional petrophysical data and OTV imaging for additional downhole logging. So in that regard, we can just see the strike and orientations of any structures of interest and veins downhole that you can't really collect from RC chips. So just looping around to what I said before, what is the Bundarra Pluton? Basically, it's a multi-stage Cretaceous Pluton intruding Permian sediments, creating a hornfels halo. It is classed as a lode-style porphyry mineralized system with high-grade structurally controlled lodes associated with faults, veins, stockwork, breccia zones, and alteration zones. So when I say porphyry, it's not your 500 meters at 0.2%. It's high-grade sulfide vein, or relatively high-grade, and there is sulfide veins cross-cutting with alteration halos around it. It's also got some really interesting brecciated zones around the place, and potentially some new mineralized zones that we're exploring for in the very near future. And how do we effectively and efficiently explore this without wasting all the time and money? Pretty much my exploration technique that I outlined before, of just using that geophysics, geochemistry, and most importantly, ground truthing to get on the ground. Duke is able to identify the prospective areas and rank them accordingly for drill testing. I think that is pretty much it.
Thanks, Thomas. Fantastic talk there. Can I just ask, there's a couple of questions that have come in. I'll just ask everyone who's got a question if they can start typing madly, and we'll get some questions answered out of Thomas. I'll kick it off. You mentioned that mineralisation is sulfide veins or lodes. Do you have a thought or an understanding of what might be might be controlling or bringing the mineralisation in?
Something we're actively exploring at the moment. Like what is it? So it's structurally controlled, and we believe to be some larger northeasterly structurally controlling structures. upon some recent mapping, we've identified some diorite units with some chalcopyrite mineralization, which is favorable for that copper mineralization coming through. So if that were to come in of the mineralized event and then just follow the structures, that would be my best guess at this stage.
Okay, so you think the more oxidized intrusives are bringing the copper in with them?
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. Got a few questions here from the floor, and I think the first one, Thomas, if you can flick to, I think it was slide 13. Got a question from Todd Axford. He asks, on the VTEM image, what is the white zone that wraps around the west side and across the top?
I think that was just them cutting out the extremely conductive sedimentary package that you can see pretty much over here. It was their way of filtering the data, I guess.
Okay, but nothing wrong with getting the virtual scissors out.
Yeah.
Question from Graham Rolfe. Do you have any oxide, I'll replace that word with mineralisation, and if so, how much?
Yep. Not much in terms of the structurally controlled kind of loads and stuff at Mt Flora and Iceland and Epsilon, but at the Corn Breccia, I think it extends down to about 70 meters.
Okay, yeah. The resource itself has a small oxide.
Oh, like, yeah, sorry, 10, 15 meters or so, but due to it being on a hill, it's very competent from surface and dives into fresh very quickly.
Okay, and it's all malachite and azurite.
Yeah.
Yeah. David Moore asks, any other elements? Gold, question mark, moly?
I hope, but nothing yet. Mainly just silver at this stage, but some very decent silver hits in there.
Okay. Luke Turner asks, nice presentation. Have you considered seismic to map any structural controls at depth?
We have. We've actually used seismic around the regional area of just, old coal companies. And that was just to understand the regional sedimentary units, but nothing within the Pluton itself.
Question from Nicely Done, not his real name, I suppose. How many intrusive events are identified? Is it possible to correlate between your sites?
That's a good question. Not sure in terms of Bundarra Pluton. It's a multi-phase intrusive. You can actually see from this photo that it clearly outlines that one main big one, and then you have your two out to the east, and then your one down to the southwest. And there was just a whole suite of other different intrusives coming through of various compositions that just show an evolving magma chamber at depth. But other than that, it's, I guess a little bit too early.
Yeah, and the structures are cross-cut that are mineralised or known to be mineralised, cross-cut, all of them, don't they? So they're certainly pre-mineralisation.
Yes, yeah, sorry.
There's also a couple of other intrusions around, one to the southwest, showing your map, and there was also another one that you've got some ground peaked around. Do you believe that they're the same age, or are they something different?
At this stage, yes, same age, just because they have been identified as Cretaceous Plutons. But, how they came to that conclusion, I can't really vouch. I've just, read it. But if it's intrusive within that trend, with mineralization present, I mean, the thought is it's similar.
Okay. And if anyone else has got some questions, please type them up, or we're going to finish up very shortly. We're getting close to our time as it is. With those other intrusions to the southwest and to the northeast, are there mapped or known prospects on those as well, or are they undercover?
Geoania undercover, and it's interpreted buried intrusive. We're starting to look at, we're starting to do some work there. We're just balancing act with the start of the RC on Bundarra at the moment, but Waitara has actually got quite a lot of historic work on it. It was held under a private company for like 20 years that just did quite a lot of drilling. That it looks similar to Bundarra in some ways, but there's also some traditional porphyry mineralization there with 200 meters at 0.2, 0.3% copper. But then there's also high grade in there of like up to 7% intercepts in the historic results.
Thank you. Another question from Todd Axford. Thomas, what do you think is under the highly conductive sediments?
Coal? No. The highly conductive sediments, we don't know because our conductivity exploration technique is useless because it just is barren high conductivity measurements. And then the soil sampling didn't really identify anything because I think of a little bit of cover there. I think there is room for some breccia pipes in the region that we're exploring. But it's actually, if I go to this slide over here, the conductivity is able to actually map some of the surrounding sedimentary units you can see on the western flank. So I believe this just units within the Back Creek group coming through, but I guess coming back to your question before, no idea what's underneath it.
It's largely just getting into Permian sediments going through your coal sequence and
yeah, down
to basement eventually, one would imagine. Question for Mark. What is the nature of the vein selvage alteration?
Vein selvage alteration. Heavily dominated by sericite. There's also albite alteration, chlorite logged, but sericite is our main kind of alteration that we do see and associated with the sulfides. There's also early potassic alteration that we see overprinted as well in areas. But yeah, I'd put my money on sericite anytime we drill a hole.
I think that's almost anywhere that's mineralized. Yeah. And I think the final word goes to Mr. Doug Young. Is the mineralization wholly contained within the Pluton complex, or does it extend out into the surrounding sediments?
Yes, sorry, I probably should have said that. Mineralization cross-cuts the contact. So you can just, at Mt Flora specifically, you can track it, I don't know, I think it's 50 meters or so, if not more, going into the granodiorite. Actually, sorry, up to 200 meters, we did track it. And then the majority of it is in the sediments. But then in other areas that we've drilled down in the southwest, we're also hitting it just solely within the intrusive. So I think it's just following early structures, and then it's just running along them. And then in some areas which we are identifying, it's just concentrating with higher grades.
Someone has snuck in with one last one. We've got a bit of time, we'll get it in. Alan Moore asks, says the cross-section implies the Hornfells is underlain by granodiorite where drilling terminates. Is there any indication of low-grade mineralisation in the granodiorite?
Not that we've seen. It's purely that structural control, and there's none of that classic porphyry, disseminated mineralisation there. But
where the structures cross the granite, that's mineralised?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So it does go in there. All right. Thanks very much for your time, Thomas. I think we're run out of questions here. There's quite a few. Excellent. Obviously, everyone was awake and attentive and asking some great questions.
So, much appreciated.
On behalf of the AIG, I'd like to thank Thomas and Duke Exploration. Thanks very much.